Hey everyone, I'm Kloo. Today we're going to go over how I generally like to build bosses in Minecraft. So first things first, we're going to set up a way to essentially randomize the boss's abilities. So we're going to just build off of this little stencil with a few different changes, and what we're building is a redstone contraption that essentially has a random choice between two different outputs. So think of it like a coin flip machine. So this is the blueprint, so to speak. Then we're attaching a dropper to a hopper. This will allow us to pulse the dropper and put an item in the hopper, and then detect it with a comparator that we can then split between two different pathways. So on this first hand, a single pulse will trigger this side, and then any output that is longer than 2 will trigger this side. So we're going to attach two torches that we can then switch off depending on the output. Then from here, we're running a repeater into a comparator, and on this side, 2 redstone dust. We turn this to subtract mode, and as you can see now, there's one on and one off, and this is our two different sides of the coin. So if we go ahead and put in this dropper one item that stacks to 64, and then another item that stacks to either single or a 16, so like a snowball. We put them both in, and anytime we now pulse this dropper, it's going to actually determine one of two outcomes. So if we go ahead and grab a button, get rid of that for now, we go ahead and pulse our dropper, which I should put on top so we can see properly. Every time I click it, either that left side lights up, or that right side first goes off and then back on. So we've got two different outputs that we can now use to determine two different abilities for a boss. And if you want to increase the range of abilities or increase just a random variable, you can stack this on top of itself and create all different chains. Other than that, this is the basic setup that I use for bosses. And then from here, we just attach command blocks. And using these command blocks, we're now going to give different entities unique abilities. So the way we do this is very, very simple. We just use the execute command, and we're executing at an entity. And in this little bracket, you can now determine your specific boss. So you can either go off of type, for instance. So wither skeleton, slime, whatever type of mob you're using, you can limit it to that. Or you can use things like names. So for instance, you could have a name tagged entity, and then we're only detecting that entity. Or there's a few different ones. You can tag it so if you don't want the player to necessarily know it's a boss. There's lots of different ways to essentially just pinpoint one single mob that we're going to use. Make it nice and easy, we're just going to stick with names. So we're just going to call it test. So anything named test will now be able to trigger this command block. The other thing I do is I then use an if statement to detect the player. So we're going if entity, and in this case we're doing any player, so you can do either nearest, you can do all, you can do random, you can select a certain person. We'll stick with all, but I like to put in a distance parameter. So this means that it will only activate if there's a player within said interval. So for instance, if we put .50, the player has to be within 50 blocks of the entity name test for this command block to actually trigger. So now we could do something like run say hi, and now we could pulse, and of course because there's no entity, even if that side lights up, ooh, one of these times, there we go, nothing happens. But if we go ahead and grab a name tag, and an anvil, of course, to rename it, we go ahead and name any of these slimes test, and make sure that it is working. So 50 blocks should definitely be fine. You just need that other side to light up. There we go, and it says hi. So that's all there is to it, really. This setup allows us to determine two different abilities, and then just using that simple chain of determining your boss entity, and then if there's a player nearby, we can run all different types of commands. So we can do things like giving the player effects, we can make it set certain blocks to the player, for instance like powdered snow, lava, anything you really want to do. There's a limitless possibility, essentially. Command blocks are very much just like basic Minecraft. Whatever you want to build, there is a way, you just have to be creative enough to figure it out. So I'm going to play around, set up a few things, and then we'll go over them. Right, so I've gone ahead and set up two different effects. Our little test buddy seems to have run off, so we'll use someone else. And again, we'll trigger it, so one or two things will happen. So we got levitation, so call that boss ability A. See if we can get the other one. Nope, we got levitation back to back. Will happen one of these times. Oh, there we go. It put a slime block near us. So just a basic concept of using either the effect command. So we're just giving every player levitation. Again, use the brackets to limit this towards whatever settings you have. For instance, you'd be inclined to match at least the distance, so that it only affects players within that boss radius. And then for the other one, we're using the set block command. The only difference with this command is we're now using execute at. So we're testing if a player is near the boss. So execute at boss if there's a player within 50 blocks. Then we're running another execute at a random player. So this can be anything you really want. You could run it at every player. You could run it at the nearest player. You could run it as random, as I have it. So for instance, on random, it's only going to set one block. If you change it to all, it's obviously going to place a block near every player. And there's lots of different ways you can just manipulate it. We can also take this a step further and make the boss a little bit more complex, and we can add stuff like different text commands. So all we have to do is essentially just add more commands to these chains. It's a real simple system. Right, so all I've added is one chain command to each command block, and all this is going to do is add a bit of flavor to it. So if we trigger an effect, hopefully there's someone nearby. So in chat, you can see it says slimed, and of course there's a slime block near us. We get the other one, bounce, we get levitation. So this way you can sort of indicate to anyone who's playing or, fighting your boss, a way to essentially understand what ability is going on. And this is just one step in making them a bit more complex. Again, super simple. All we're doing is changing the chain command block to conditional. So as long as the actual effect triggers, it's going to put in chat slimed, or it's going to put in chat bounce. Super simple. Again, it's all up to your imagination. You can add as many different things as you want. You can add all different effects. The only big thing that it relies on, or at least I like to use, is this coin flip machine. Just a super simple way to create two different outcomes for the boss, or multiple if you want to stack them on top of each other. Generally speaking, I use 3 layers. So a coin flip machine that then goes into 4 different outputs. That way I can have 4 different abilities. The other avenues you could explore are manipulating NPT data, so actually editing the mobs to make them obviously a bit more of a boss. But this can also be simply accomplished through potion effects. For instance, in a similar method, you could just execute at any entity that you've named or tagged. Tagged is a good way to get around players being able to fabricate the boss, because obviously any player who goes out and names a name tag test can trigger this mechanism. So if you use the tag commands, it's a little bit simpler, and all you have to do is tag. If you look at the entity, it will pop up. So if one of them doesn't want to bounce while I type, let's try it. Let's see if we're quick enough. Yep. So the entity comes up. I can just tag this as, say, boss. And now if we change this to, instead of name, to tag, it will still work, and it will only trigger off whichever slime is the boss slime. Any other slime doesn't really matter, and there's no way for the player to know who exactly the boss is or to tamper with the boss. So we see, we still got slimed. The only other thing that you might want to set up is a way to trigger this without buttons on, say, a set timer. So I'm just going to quickly build a timer mechanism, and then we'll go over it. So again, another super simple thing to set up. You can see in chat, it's counting up, it gets to 60, and then it resets. So this is effectively a 3-second timer. And all we're doing is scoreboard objective add timer dummy. And then we're adding 1 to the timer constantly. So scoreboard players add at all timer 1. And then anytime it reaches 60, so scoreboard players reset at all whose scores equal timer 60, it's going to reset the scoreboard. Now, an important thing to remember is the game runs in ticks, 20 ticks per second. So this is 3 seconds. If you want to say a minute, you just take 60 and times by 20, so 1,200. So if we wanted it to reset every minute, that's what we do. But we'll keep it at 3 seconds. And then for the other portion of it, all we're doing is execute if nearest player's timer matches 1. So every time that clock runs around and hits 1, it's going to set a redstone block here. And then the second one's just going to replace it with air block. So again, just execute at the nearest player, timer matches 1, run set block, whatever coordinates match whatever place you're wanting the redstone block to be. And then the first one was redstone, second one's air, and they're both set to replace. So if we go ahead and turn this on, every 3 seconds, a boss ability will effectively trigger. And if we go ahead and just turn off the command block output, we'll now just see all the abilities pop up in chat. So every 3 seconds, a new ability is being used. We're getting bounced up and down, up and down. So super simple. Hope it's useful.